All right, we're back with video number 4 in the Sustainable Product Platforms video series. Now we're going to talk about the structure of a sustainable product platform. There's a number of ways in which they can be governed, all right? And governance is about who controls, who owns, and how the relationships among the members involved in a sustainable product platform is organized, right? So what we can think about is a spectrum of the way these things can be organized and structured. On the one, at the far end, they can be vertically integrated, and with a vertically integrated sustainable product platform, that means a single company controls and owns all of the elements of the value cycle. So it owns the fabrication or manufacturing process, owns the distribution, owns the recovery, it owns the regeneration of the materials, etc. They control the entire value cycle. At the other extreme is completely open sourced, where there are a set of sort of standardized materials, standardized value cycle processes that allow multiple players to operate and compete for access to the materials, compete for processing in a completely open source sense. And then somewhere in between where there is a partnership or collaboration between different members of the value cycle. All right, we can look at examples of all of this. And we'll start with the open sourced one because it's the one we're most familiar with. An open sourced is sort of a self-organized coordination, and it's done primarily through market forces and also standards, industry standards about how things, sort of quality and how things operate within the industry. So, we're all familiar with, for example, aluminum recycling, right? Aluminum recycling is largely an open source value cycle. No one, when you buy aluminum, when you buy a soda, you get the can. The can is fundamentally yours. And whether or not it gets back to the system depends on how these market forces coordinate both how it's recovered, who gets it when it's recovered, who does the processing. It's an open sourced market-based system for recycling the aluminum. That's true for things like steel as well. I mean, there are major players and there is concentration in the industry. But the value cycle and the flow of the materials in the system is sort of based on market forces more than anything else. It's not based on inside company or corporate control. Another type of, we're starting then this, you'll see these different types of governance structures begin to blur. But another example of this was, back in the late 2000s, Coca Cola started creating what they called the drink to wear, where they would recover plastic bottles, PET bottles, and that would be then recycled and used to produce clothing. And so they had this clothing line, and this picture shows it takes 5 bottles to produce one T-shirt, right? So this was a sort of an experimentation driven for a number of reasons by Coca Cola. One is they wanted to strengthen and enhance the supply of recycled materials, and by creating multiple uses, sort of like we talked about, diversifying the products that can be built off a PET plastic platform, you actually enhance the supply and robustness of the material cycles itself. And again, it was another way to demonstrate that they were doing something about the huge amount of plastic bottle waste that was occurring. This has evolved now. Coca Cola has now made a partnership with will.i.am, and they've created their own company. It's called EcoCycle. It's a brand. It's a brand. But again, it's the same thing. We're recovering these plastic bottles and we're cycling them into will.i.am branded clothing, right? So what we're seeing now, though, is we're moving from a purely sort of open sourced system because, again, the plastic bottles are out there. It's open, available for whoever's able to recover and capture them. But we're starting to see some kind of elements of partnership going on in this. And that's the next level. And this is where there's collaborative coordination of the different platform or value cycle tasks shared between, usually contractually between different companies and different entities. And we've already seen some of this. Again, the Patagonia relationship is in partnership with their materials reprocessor, the Japanese company Teijin. And this is how they structure their platform. It's a partnership. And there are other examples of this in sort of packaging recycling. Oftentimes there are these types of partnerships where you have sort of the customer-facing brand, the front of the shop, and then the back of the back house, or behind the scenes is where the cycling is done by a partner who's specialized, has expertise, and capable of doing that. So those are partnership models. And then finally, there's vertical integration, and this is where a single company controls the whole value cycle, controls, in a sense, never really cedes ownership of their property, of the product. And you can begin to see what that does. If you have a value cycle, the product ultimately that you're selling to your customer, you are counting on and want it to come back at some point. And so you begin to see elements of, maybe I'm not selling this product to you, maybe I'm using it to you, I'm loaning it to you, I'm leasing it to you. You can begin to see those elements emerge naturally from the creation of this product platform. So we've seen some of this in the commercial carpeting industry. Shaw Industries is an interesting example. They created a two-part closed loop value cycle for their carpeting tiles back in the early 2000s. These are carpeting tiles. You can see they're little squares, and they're put down much like you would put down ceramic tiles. They're put down in tile form. And they're composed of two pieces. There's the soft, fluffy stuff you walk on, and then there's a hard backing, a heavy backing that holds it flat. And Shaw had developed systems for both recovering and recycling both the soft, fibery part of the top and the backing. And this is the way Shaw envisioned its closed loop value cycle. And so we could spend a lot of time discussing this, but there's just a couple of things you want to point out. First of all, you can see it is a loop. They would collect the old carpet. It goes through a deep loop value cycling process that depolymerizes the nylon, turns it into the raw materials, and then gets spun out as new fiber, and then it's manufactured again and then distributed through a retailer. Now, one of the things you'll notice, core in the middle of their value cycle is their customer's home, right? So that carpet is actually, you begin to ask the question, who owns that carpet? Clearly Shaw is counting on getting that carpeting back at some point to feed their value cycle. So that begins to set up a lot of questions. And the question is, one of the big questions is, how do you capture that? Now what Shaw did, you can see this right here, on the back of their tiles, they put a phone number and says, when you're done, when you're pulling this stuff up and it's piled out, in your dumpster or whatever, call us because we want to come back and get it because it's raw inputs to our next production cycle. And so they had this built in, a phone number you could call, and Shaw would go out and collect it. But this begins to then point to what happens. We've been talking about a value cycle, but once you create this parsimonious materials palette and an existing value cycle on a platform, you set up conditions whereby every act of creating one of these things means that the waste becomes a valuable input. We talked about this previously, but it goes from being stuff you throw away to, hey, this is gold. This is gold. This is what we need to get back in order for our manufacturing system to function, right? And so that all of these questions will drive how are we going to try to govern this value cycle, this product platform we've created. Are we going to have it be an open source system? Are we going to try to do it all in-house? And if so, what is the relationship to our product when it's being used by our customer? Or are we going to do it in partnership and have a blending of, say, open materials loops, but our closed system? All of this becomes a big question of governance, and there are multiple answers. And what we've seen is different materials, different types of processes result in different solutions to this challenge. All right, so we'll be moving on to our next video. We're going to wrap up the sustainable product platforms question and then move into our final biosphere rule.